The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
Deep right, we got tanks up there. Let's follow a range on deep right. I'm right on the target right now. I've got a couple of these right in front of me. I'm going out for it. Right, I got him.
Welcome back to the Lead Pursuit podcast. Tonight is a little more somber episode as we in the hobby community have lost one of the greats this week. Now, a lot of you historical gamers make fun of us for still being adherents to Warhammer 40K, but I realize almost all of us here on the podcast and many of you out there are 40K refugees. So guess what? We're going to talk about John Blanche tonight. And John, for all of his family, friends, co-workers, artists he influenced, and millions of gamers around the world, they're all feeling the loss of John tonight. However, we do have to talk about his art, because his art was foundational to Warhammer 40K, Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and a lot of other fantasy and science fantasy art out there. But of course, tonight, I had to bring the crew. I had to bring our artist in residence, the man who don't even have to ask him if he's a commissioned painter, because he'll tell you. Chris, how you doing?
Doing great, man. Doing great. Thanks for having me on tonight. I appreciate you reaching out. It has been somber this week at work since we got the news. So, I mean, it's amazing to work with a group of artists and something like this happens, and everybody's like, "Okay, let's just take a minute."
Absolutely, absolutely. Brett, the guy who came in well after John Blanche wasn't making White Dwarf covers. Brett, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good.
All right, good to have you. And Steve, the man who, out of the whole group, says, John who? But that's fine because he never played 40K. Steve, how are you doing tonight?
Doing good.
Awesome. All right, well, good to have you all on. Yeah, it is a somber topic. One of the legends of the Warhammer 40K art community has passed away. But I think it's really important to talk about his legacy and a lot of things that we don't realize that he might have influenced. Because John Blanche does get pigeonholed as, quote, the father of Grimdark, or the grandfather of Grimdark, as I saw one YouTuber calling him. And I think that's doing him a little bit of a disservice. I was kind of hoping Matt was going to be on. I'd reached out to the whole podcast to ask, send me your favorite John Blanche images. He was the only one who complied. Chris couldn't even comply, but that's all right.
I posted on my webpage, man. If you just give me a follow, you can see what I like.
No, I'm not going to feed your ego. No follows here. But to talk about John's art, if you have never seen it, it is different. It is based in a lot of techniques that are classic masters techniques, but takes it in a very, very different way. For those of us who did know his art and saw it a lot, it was a surprise to me this week as I kind of went down the rabbit hole of John's history with Games Workshop. I'm going to ask Chris because he is the oldest 40K player on the podcast by a month. When do you think John Blanche started doing 40K art?
You know, I would have to say it was the early 80s, and I would probably be wrong. But I mean, I remember that where we did that divergence where kind of TSR and Dungeons and Dragons kind of in the back of the Dungeons and Dragon magazine, you started seeing this little Warhammer game thing pop up in these advertisements, and you're like, oh, what's that over there? And for me personally, that's when I first remember seeing his art is probably mid to late 80s. So I really don't know.
Yeah, for me it was definitely late 80s in the time frame of Rogue Trader. Now, what I had forgotten with Rogue Trader was that he was already the art director of that project by the time that stuff came up, and I was, I guess, naive enough to think that, John Blanche was just a contributing artist. No, he was really knee deep in all of that. Brett, what's your question?
I think I was in 8th grade, and D&D was kind of a thing. I wasn't really playing, but I was into the little pewter figures, and I saw a lot of with the TSR books and stuff, all the artwork and stuff. Anyway, I have a recollection. You guys helped me out. that there was a module maybe when I was in about 8th grade where they introduced power armor. And I saw it for the first time, and I thought that was so badass. I think the context, if I recall, was
that would be S3 Expedition to the Barrier Peaks.
Okay, yeah.
The
It was like some kind of dungeon
starship
thing, and it was crash starship. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So it was like they like put the two things together somehow. Anyway, I remember seeing power armor. I was like, what? That's what I kind of think of John Blanche, I guess, all the way back to that kind of thing, like Road Trader kind of stuff.
It's funny. There's a lot of his stuff that I saw that I didn't realize was his art at the time. And I was going back today looking through stuff, and they reminded me that he kind of started as the hippie fairy art crowd doing his work there. And so some of the work he'd done was for a couple Tolkien books, and one of them was a Battle of the Five Armies, big, epic, kind of the thing that you're used to seeing for John Blanche. And I saw that, and I was like, I've known that image. I never knew that was his image. That's an amazing image. And then obviously he got picked up on the team for Games Workshop for Citadel, doing things with them. Probably the one that I like the most, the non-Warhammer art of his that I like the most, was his Amazon Gothic, which is the rebellion against fantasy bikini clad art, chainmail stereotypes, where he put this badass, punk rock looking female warrior in stiletto heels on the cover of White Dwarf magazine. I remember seeing that and going, that's totally not like anything I see Larry Elmore or anyone else doing. So
Boris Vallejo, everything. It's just a total departure
was
from
not
that era
at all. Yeah.
No.
So it was super cool to see that. And I got going back through seeing some other images that he'd done that were very similar to that one. But, my first intro to the Warhammer art was Warhammer 40K Rogue Trader, and his was sprinkled throughout there, but it was by no means the only art in there. And it was by no means the most gothic, grimdark art in there. There were other artists that were far darker than he was at that time. And so that was kind of a fascinating learning point to me, because there are even some pieces in there that I'm like, oh yeah, that's got to be a John Blanche. No, that's not a John Blanche piece. But it was interesting to see that the ones that I did really identify were not 40K pieces. They were Warhammer fantasy pieces of his that were ones that I saw. And it was kind of a weird moment for me, because I'll call it maybe survivor's remorse. I don't know what it is. I had this moment where I'm like, I really liked his fantasy art. I really didn't like his 40K art, but there's that iconic dwarf picture of his that's got, all the dwarves ready to go to battle. And that's another one. I'm like, that's a great fantasy art,
Remember how all the box art used to be like big battle scenes or whatever?
Oh yeah.
Right up to the last iteration of Fantasy Battle.
Yep.
Was that his art? Was that typically something he did? I always think of like
some of it was. So I'd have to take a look at the later ones. I don't think were, but yeah, some of the early stuff was.
I always imagine his stuff being more like a single page components of different things, not like
and he did a lot of book covers for like early fantasy codices and stuff. I'd have to grab. Let me see if I can pull it up here.
Well, we're talking about freaking front cover art.
Yes.
Some of the pieces that he did that should have been front cover art, like the stand of the Black Templars on Armageddon. Yes. And I find it really interesting that he's passing only a week before we process pre-orders for the new box set for 11th edition, which is Armageddon.
Well, you should mention that, and we'll talk about that here in a second.
Yeah,
but first, let me share this image just so everybody and the podcast can see it. That is one of my favorites of his, and it's a fantasy one. And I make no bones about it. I love this image. I love the detail, and it's everything about it being a Blanche image with, the crows flying in the distance, 13 different kinds of horns the dwarves are blowing. And I loved it in fantasy, but I couldn't do it in 40K, except the image behind me. So this one was the cover to the second edition box set. And I loved this one. And I was like, I can't believe I don't have it anywhere. And thankfully, it's on one of their catalogs from that time frame. But that, for 40K, that John Blanche image was one that I loved, which is ironic because, as you mentioned, 11th edition, they're going back to Armageddon. And if you look at the cover of 11th edition, it is an homage to that cover.
It is.
And it's pretty cool.
And if you look at both of those covers and you go back to that stand of the Black Templars against the Orcs in Armageddon that Blanche painted, it's that same iconic building of a pyramid of humanity against everything that's dark. And it is neat that they keep going with that very iconic look where everything builds to the center of the piece of art. And when he did do things, it was just, that was what pulled you in, was there were all these little pieces and the detail drops off so quickly as you go into the image, but there are things moving around out there that are kind of shapeless, trying to take form. And that's what I always loved about his art, is you got this
about his art. There were things in the background you squint at. What is that?
You got this blast of this hyper reality in the middle of the image, and as the image diffuses, there are so many things that are moving around and the little micro dots that he's making in the image. It's like a lot of Elmore's art and a lot of the later Dungeons and Dragons art. It's a painting. It's like Frazzetti. You look at it and it's boom. Everything is rendered in detail. You can see everything in the image. It leaves nothing to the mind to explore. Blanche's art always left this. It's like this ether that floats around everything that he does, that you just get to walk around in and you wonder, what are all those things? I want to see more. I want to go deeper into this image.
That's the laughter of the thirsting gods, right?
Exactly. So I'm going to share another one that is one of my favorites, non-John Blanche, for that very point to talk about what you're saying. So Jim Burns, this is his iconic image that's off the box of Space Marine, and then it was used several other times. And if you've never read his Planetfall book and seen the art in that, you need to. He obviously was just freelancing with GW. He was not on the staff for GW, but it still has that pyramid shape as things go up. I still laugh that this is the infamous Al Pacino Scarface model in the middle of it, and the random neo-Nazi in the background.
Yeah.
But I think there were elements there in what Jim did and what other people did that played on what John Blanche had done. But I think, for right or for wrong, people always lay that as John Blanche's style, but it became Warhammer style as soon as he had done a couple of them. And actually, he was beat to the punch because he didn't do the cover art for Rogue Trader. That was the first one that had the pyramid of Space Marines standing on each other's bodies, beating a guy with an orc head. I still laugh about that thoroughly inappropriate war crime was on the cover of the book, and then it rapidly faded out of that piece of art. Every other time GW showed that piece of art, the guy's fist was in the air. It didn't have a dead orc's severed head he was beating people with. So kinder gentler Games Workshop, I guess.
Yeah, I was watching last night. I rewatched the Grim in the Dark, the Jason Heder, if you haven't seen it, which is it's a 2-hour documentary basically on what is grimdark and what is this art. And it starts off as him saying, "Hey, I just want to get into gaming. My son's interested in it. I don't know anything about this." And they move you from like his Texas gaming community all the way up to him going around the world and then terminating at a 20-minute meeting, on the documentary with John Blanche. And he goes through very basically a lot of those things. What is it about this art that makes it what it is? And I think it was neat in it that it was an homage. You had all these game designers that they interview, and everybody points. I mean, I don't know if that was the point of the documentary. That was what they set off to, hey, this is where we want to end up anyway, because we really just want to do an interview with John Blanche. But there are so many people art-wise that pay so much to him as giving them.
There are, because he was such a good person, and he was always willing to share techniques. He also was a inveterate experimenter in art techniques, and so he would try things when others were afraid to do that. He was the same when it came to miniature painting. Many of the techniques we now think of as modern heavy metal studio techniques, he tried them to imitate the master's paintings and to say, how do I get this same look that that one of the old masters had in the painting of Napoleon or this various European battle. But I think some disservice has been done, and maybe it's because I'm not a Blanchitsu guy, I'm not a John Blanche fanboy, but I think in the telling of his story, and I'll be honest, I haven't watched that documentary. I need to. I think they really minimized, or I think the hobby has minimized what a team player he was. And that and I'll use a 40K analogy, he was just a cog in the machine. Yes, he had his style, but as the art director, he was constantly influencing people. And more importantly, he and Jess Goodwin were paired at the hip. And it's fascinating to hear Jess talk about John Blanche because he really sees him as a mentor and not as a peer. But those two people, everything that is 40K aesthetics today came out of those two minds. Everything, whether it's Xenos, whether it's how the different marks of the power armors look, all of those things came from those two collaborating. And there were things that John would do in a very John Blanche kind of way, and Jess would clean it up and turn it into something they could make a miniature of. I'm sure Brett remembers like Vostroyans and a lot of these other Imperial Guard regiments that were crazy looking Baroque kind of things.
The painting that he did of the Vostroyans, that's right up. And I think it's just the big bearskin hats.
If I had to pick a painting, not that one, that was a John Blanche I liked, the Vostroyan one is a close second. Yeah, some of the old Witch Hunter stuff was still around, like 5th edition, right? Yeah. Like, I always thought that stuff was pretty cool. All the Inquisitors. Matt's not here to talk about it, but some of his favorites were the Inquisitor images, which I just did not like. They were not my scene, much like people say they really liked his Sisters of Battle, which I call crack hoe with a sword. But that image did not resonate with me like a lot of his other stuff did. But the interesting part looking at the pairing of Jess Goodwin and him was that it's still grim dark. It may be more cleaned up and more technical when Jess did it, but it was still that same aesthetic that John Blanche had started thinking about and drew in a very different way. I'm afraid to know what Chris is looking for. Which of his ancient rule books did he pull up?
I was trying to find this beautiful tome. Which is this is the tome to own, by the way, if you're into to any of the art that starts out back there with the Heresy. But Visions of Heresy, they compiled it all into one book. And when you flip through here, it is basically there's a lot of artists in here, but you have no doubt when you turn to a Blanche image. Oh yeah. Because they the color palette alone, and Steve's probably rolling his eyes. The Zorn palette.
It's exactly. It is literally the same palette used in a variety of different ways, whether it's a Battlefleet Gothic spaceship blasting out of the warp or it's the Golden Throne, whatever. It's a very similar palette, but used in a variety of creative ways. It kind of reminds me of like Greek Orthodox iconography or something. It's, very like the colors even.
Yeah. I'll tell you that there's a fascinating part of that documentary when you watch it where Heater goes to Finland to speak with a Finnish game developer, and he ends up in a Finnish Orthodox church looking at the icons that are on the walls and the tile work that's done and the painting work that's done. And it was a beautiful way to put that in the documentary because you can see it. And that what they're talking about is the influences and where these classic Baroque art ideas came from and how they molded what Blanche did. And then they do these flashback images. Go see it, where they will take even modern terrain where you've got these iconic Space Marine statues standing there with a spear. And then they show you in the church this statue, of an archangel standing there with a spear. Yeah. And it's eerie how they went to these very religious, very meaningful tropes to people and incorporated that into all the artwork. And that is completely by design.
Glad you brought that up, because this is where we talk about the uncomfortable parts of it. That there were tropes that he adopted that if you didn't understand their political background or the background of England in the 1980s and growing up in Nottingham in a very industrial, depressed. In his biography, it talks about the fact that all the school cared was which of the 4 factories would you go to. You know, they didn't really care what if you want to be an artist. Yeah, no one's an artist. Which factory are you going to go work in? But if you don't understand that and you see some of the blatant Nazi iconography, some of the blatant fascist iconography, and you don't understand why it's being put in there, it gets a little disturbing because I went back, I looked at one of his commissar images and I'm like, oh my God, that is Adolf Hitler as a commissar, mustache and all. But that's one of the uncomfortable parts about some of his art was that he was incorporating things that were in our world inherently evil, but was the faction you were going to play. And so I think that I think there were a lot of people that were put off by that. I think, unfortunately, there were a lot of people that felt warm and fuzzy with that kind of imagery, and I'll say it that way. There were people that were too comfortable with that kind of imagery, but I think that did become an interesting lightning rod for a lot of people not liking the 40K, aesthetic.
I mean, and you see it still play out on message boards today, where you get the two actually nerds that are pushing their glasses up, that one's arguing that, hey, the empire is a good thing. And the other ones are, this is complete sarcasm and you're a fascist. And I mean, I check out of those message boards the second that goes down, but it happens every day. That's taking place somewhere on the internet in relation to the community that is.
It didn't help when people with, and I will just say, questionable political beliefs co-opted some of the Warhammer 40K and Warhammer Fantasy artwork for their things. And that made it, then it got super adjacent and super scary at that point. But once again, that happens with so many icons and so many different symbols, like the Maltese cross. The Maltese cross predates a lot of things that it is now associated with, unfortunately. But the fascinating thing with a lot of Blanche's work that I saw, and one of the other ones that's I'll call it a low hanging favorite of mine, is the box for the Imperial Army, because he really set the tone for probably 5 years of what Imperial Army, not Imperial Guard, what Imperial Army was going to look like before some of this stuff kind of got retconned, and it was that very dome helmet, insignia on the shoulder, guys that look like biker gang in uniform, I think is the best way to describe them. But knowing his background, that very much fit in with how he kind of saw the world. So for those of us that like Steve, who are not huge Blanche fans, what out of Warhammer 40K, what in that art kind of draws you in? What in that the grim, dark style of things?
So I just kind of looking over this over the last day, right? One of the things that actually got me into miniatures gaming to start with was in probably like the late 90s, just going to Hobby Lobby and looking at the boxes, and as a modeler going like, man, I don't know, I think I might want to try to like put some of those together or paint some of those, like not even knowing what they are, right? And it's funny because I didn't know until looking through, friends making posts on Instagram and stuff today and all that about it, right? Didn't know specifically who made those stuff, but everything that you're saying, it's like a very, like, obviously this same guy did this picture, that, like, it's a very identifiable style. Like you're saying, I would say I am not really like an art aficionado, and I'm kind of on Doug's side of it. Like, don't make me try to figure out your painting. Just like, let me, let me like you do the painting and I'll do the looking, kind of like you figure it out for me. Right. But I really do appreciate artwork like that for that reason also. Cause like my brain would never be able to create something abstract like that and make it look good, if that makes sense. Right. So it's just neat to see that stuff that I knew what it was, but I didn't know it was associated with this guy that like most people are a big fan of. Right.
Well, it's funny for me because I think maybe it's my ADHD is I can't look at one of those images because I keep bouncing around and what's that and what's that over there, you know. So there's too much detail in some ways for what I want to see in the image, but it's fascinating to see how even his style progressed because, like I said, he was basing it on these paintings of Napoleonic battles where Napoleon is not the center figure, he's this little figure over in the corner, and the shaft of sunlight is shining down on him, but everything else is this giant battle that's going on. And so that was kind of what he was emulating, which was not a style I grew up knowing or liking for a style of art.
But his style though, and where you guys are saying, you know, I don't want to sit here and have to stare at it. And I am the complete opposite. I can tell you that I have walked around at both of the Salvador Dali museums, and I could spend a week there. I could spend a week just going through Salvador Dali's paintings, one painting at a time, and spending an hour sitting there staring at it because it just constantly leads your mind around through, and it's amazing. This is we're talking about a 3 foot by 5 foot or 3 foot by 6 foot canvas, but it just draws you in and it just continues to speak to it. And you can continue to disassemble this and find other things in it and wonder what else is there and keep looking for them.
Your brain is that disciplined. And like I said, I love the detail in Blanche's work. And I love focusing and going, oh, wait, that thing in the background, that's actually a Thunderhawk gunship. But if I let myself roam, it will drive me absolutely
man,
bonkers.
it just dawned on me that they have those little couches at art museums for people like Chris. They're not just to take like a break. They're not just like take a break and drink your water.
Yeah. We're all tired, bored from walking around the art museum. Chris wants to sit there and ponder Salvador Dali's art.
Oh my God! But that's what makes it so amazing, and I think that's one of the reasons why
you're a painter.
So epic. And it is. I mean, but it really does. Like I said, I'm not dissing Elmore and a lot of the later artists that came along and got really famous, but they're a lot of their paintings, even when you look at like I said, Vallejo or Frazzetti, it's very a matter of fact. It's what you see is what you get. There's there's symbolism there that you can sit there and kind of take apart, but it's not the depth, the layered depth that you get with somebody like Blanche. And that's what I think I really enjoy about it.
You'll laugh when I throw this back at you this way. I see it differently. So I see it as, and this is me taking a side of an argument I normally don't take, that there are things in art aesthetically that are pleasing. And I would say that to my eye, the Frazetta, the Vallejo, that art is visually pleasing more to me than even as interesting as the subject or the composition of a Blanche piece is. That unless it gets to a certain style of Blanche's work, I don't find it pleasing enough to enjoy. And that's a art aesthetics thing.
And I completely see, and on some levels, I do agree with your point. There are some Frazzetti images and some Elmore images. I've got Dragon magazines laying all over this house. There are iconic images that, yes, they are very amazing. But I'm just, like I said, I think Blanche came along at the right time for what he was coming along into. Yeah. And one of the things I've always wondered is, did Blanche come into Games Workshop? And this is something I've never really read anywhere, and maybe you can point me somewhere. Who developed who? Because it gets really strange as this company hatches, because you look at Blanche's art, and there are some of the poses, especially with the older Space Marines, where they're hunched down and their shoulders are really broad and the weapons are really low. And then you look at orc images that are very similar. And then you look at the miniatures of the time. And what I've always kind of wondered, nobody's ever been able to tell me, was the object imitating the art, or was the art imitating the object? Where in this whole studio sculptor thing and painters who are 2D illustrators, how did that magic work? I would love to read something that said, this is how we did this. And this is how we made this. That's why I just
ordered off Amazon his biography, because his biography is written by a lot of the people that were his co-workers. And so there's sections in there about how they collaborated. But for doing some of the research prior to this, I mean, I knew that Bob Naismith was the name in sculpting Space Marines and orcs and some of those pieces, along with the Perry brothers in that 1980s timeframe. But it became very obvious to me that there are things we think of as 40K iconic that were out of Bob Naismith's brain straight into what he sculpted. And then those were taken by John Blanche and put into a setting, into a battle, into a piece of art to have this overarching aesthetic. Because when you think about what I would call arguably a sci-fi kind of thing, powered armor, heavy bolt guns, laser rifles, all this stuff, what Blanche did was he took a sci-fi space marine and stuck it in science fantasy. Warhammer 40K is not sci-fi. Well, it became sci-fi when they introduced the Tau.
Yeah.
Go piss off, Tau. But it was always science fantasy. It was futuristic stuff, but there's orcs and elves and dwarves and the imagery is fantasy imagery. It isn't sci-fi. It isn't Star Wars. It isn't Star Trek. It is fantasy thrown into the future.
Didn't Blanche have kind of like a, I don't know, Hieronymus Bosch kind of vibe going or something?
Yes. One of his huge influences. And it's fascinating when you, again, Chris just showed the image there. That is one of the ones that is so funny because you look at it now as we're all this further in the lore and everything else. And that was very much the beginning of the Rogue Trader era when Space Marines were just warrior monks. They weren't anything. They were superhuman, but they weren't transhuman the way that they are 8 feet tall, et cetera, whatever now. So I think there's a lot of that when you look at the aesthetic, and it's why I go back to saying it's so much of a team thing, because there was art direction from John Blanche to Jess Goodwin that I didn't like Blanche's original concept. But what Jess did with it was coalesced it, turn it into something a sculptor could make, turn it into something that could be represented on the table. John Blanche's, Titan Princeps and all these things were super inspiring. But when Jess Goodwin made it a rendering for someone to sculpt off of, oh my God, then I understood it. Then the grimdark aesthetic made it to me. So I guess for me, it'll always be their partnership that got me to enjoy things that are grimdark, not just one or the other's artistry in a vacuum. And actually, that was one of the funny parts I did as the research for this, and I didn't remember this at all. Some of the images I remember the most of Warhammer 40K was in, I believe it was, and I'm going to have to look at my notes here. I think it was in 1989. Let's see here. It would have been in 1990. So September 1990, the first time they ever talked about the different marks of Space Marine armor. And who did the drawings for that? John Blanche. Now, those Space Marines, I think if we looked at them now, we might say they're a little derpy, especially the Mark IV. The poor Mark IV helmet did not get rendered very well from Rick Priestley's mind to John Blanche's pen. But that was the foundation for what has been ever since what the Space Marine armor will look like. So that his just translating what Rick saw in his head to what John put on a pen to then, Jess Goodwin and everyone else turned into miniatures. And that was a huge revolution at that time for going through the art that way. And I think that's what made Games Workshop so successful, is it wasn't one person's aesthetic. It was a continual refining of the aesthetic. And I could go on for hours about the switch from Mark 6 to Mark 7. I'm sure Brett remembers Mark 7 was the only thing that he built when he started the hobby. Occasionally they threw a Mark 6 helmet in. But yeah, that transition to where it used to be Beakies were the Space Marines. They weren't Mark 6. They were the Space Marines. Yeah. And then they introduced the different stuff that John drew. So it got fascinating. All right. Anything else we want to talk about John Blanche's art or his contributions to Warhammer 40K, wider hobby? Obviously, there's a paint line from Army Painter that's out there that is directly inspired by him and designed by him. What else?
Yeah, he's got a 54 millimeter dueling game coming out now. It'd be interesting to see where that ends up. But I had seen that when Matt mentioned it in the chat today. That was something I saw, I think it was about a couple months ago. And there were some really interesting miniatures in there, which for me, it plays back to that. It's that Necromunda, French bourgeoisie meet cyberpunk kind of aesthetic, which he did such a lovely job at rendering those disparate things together. And I will be interesting to see how much of that gets released to the audience and what comes with it.
Yeah, I will see how John Blanche's On Guard does, because it obviously was a pretty ambitious project. It looks like it was going to be really interesting, and we'll see what gets carried on.
I'm not super familiar with the model range or anything like that, but Trench Crusade ? Like how much of that is like a Blanche kind of thing, right?
I would say, I think Trench Crusade, the interview with the guys from Trench Crusade is about 20 minutes of the John Blanche documentary. And they all say, hey, he was the guy that started it, and we were just riffing on what he did. And basically they basically say, hey, we took what John did and we doubled down on all of it. Yeah.
That's really literally the best way to say it. You thought it was grim dark. We did grim and dark.
Yeah. We were going to go, we decided that the way to make money was to make it even worse than John. We're going to exponentially raise this up.
I do laugh about that sometimes when you think about the things that I looked at that I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then I look at Trench Crusade and go, ooh, that might be crossing the line. That is a little grim and dark. Yeah. But the things that we were used to from 40K, they're pretty strange in and of themselves. All right. Closing that up, once again, wanted to say to the rest of the hobby community, if you have not gone out and looked at John's work, absolutely do so. Go out and read about him. Go see how diverse his art was from his earliest times to some of the later work he did. And then especially go see his miniature work. So there's a lot of miniatures that he painted, a lot of techniques that he helped to pioneer, and then he worked with the Games Workshop studio. And go see those, because when you see a miniature with a battle banner that's the Mona Lisa, then you kind of, that summarizes the attitude of John Blanche there. So anyway, with that, I wanted to move on and talk about a couple other things coming up, slightly lighter news. So obviously, you guys had all been tracking a variety of Kickstarters that are out there. Plane Printer has been releasing new airplanes. Steve, do you want to cover anything that's going on in the Blue Falcon? Anyone else?
Oh, man, I wasn't even ready for this, but sure. So we kind of, I guess, what's it called? Like sunset, to use an aviation term, right? We sunset our decal Patreon. It was fun while we were doing it. We did a lot of stuff. In the next week or two, any of all the decals from the Patreon will all be up on the website. So if you had something that you missed or something that you liked, they'll be up on the website. So we're still doing decals. We're just changing the Patreon. And over the last year since doing the Vietnam Jet Kickstarter, I've just been getting hammered with requests for other jet STLs. So July 1st, we're going to flip the Blue Falcon Patreon over to doing jet 1/200 STLs. So they'll be the same ones as the Kickstarter. They're really high fidelity, really nice detail, really deep panel lines, all that same quality. And so keep your eye, if you don't follow the Blue Falcon Patreon. That'll be a spot for some really, really high fidelity jet STL files.
I'm excited to see those. I know we've been picking on you and beating up on you, but I do need to order some of the decals now since Matt put them on the wrong airplane. No problem, Matt. But I have to I have to pick on him publicly. He put F4 Echo decals on a F4D, but that's all right. No worries. We'll solve that just in time for the next gaming convention.
Well, don't worry. It's only Historicon, so nobody will say anything.
Nobody will notice. Anything. Yeah, there won't be a single grognard there that'll look down and go, son, that's not an F4E. Yes, God damn it. I know it's not an F4E. Thank you very much. Oh, thanks for pointing me out and shaming me further. Okay, well, so let's talk about a couple other things. Obviously, we have been doing a lot of hobby stuff this summer, trying to get ready for Historicon, trying to get ready for NashCon. I think the big announcement for Lead Pursuit, at least for me in Lead Pursuit, is that at Historicon and NashCon, yes, you can play Merged, or you can play part of the game called Merged. So there's going to be some playtest sessions at both of those that you can participate in. We've actually sold out one of them at Historicon for the Syrian 1973 Golan engagement. So it'll be fun. It is a work in progress. So if you want to come play with a set of rules and say nasty things about me about how the rules suck, this is exactly what you should do. You should show up and be mean. But we're going to play the game and we're going to try some things out, and we will, just like we did with Beyond Meg Alley, it'll be an iterative process. So we will play the game. We will change some rules. The next time you see me next summer, the game will be different. But it does have some cool bases, courtesy of Steve. So thank you, Steve, for those new acrylic bases. You may have seen them in some of the photos. Those are awesome. And the altitude pucks that will go underneath them are also going to be pretty cool. So hopefully we'll be demoing all that stuff this summer. Is there anything else hobby-wise any of you all have seen that you want to talk about? Any new tools, paints that anyone's been able to try?
Yo, I'm going to throw it out there, man. I had my first go at clear resin printing. So if you haven't done it, it's pretty cool. Like, I was actually shocked at how clear it is. Like, it's really, really clear. I wasn't expecting it to be like that. I was expecting it to be, I don't know, a little more opaque, kind of challenging to print with. But if you're looking to do something cool and you're into 3D printing, I would say give it a go. It's pretty neat. Try it out. It was fun.
What's the smell like on that stuff? I mean, that's one of the things I've always heard, that when you print with the clear resins, it is just, oh my God.
I haven't noticed anything worse than anything else, but okay. I haven't vented out of my house. I have a vent that I vent all my stuff right outside. So, but yeah, I haven't noticed anything that was, but I was actually really shocked how clear it was. So a lot of times when they say plastic is, clear, it's kind of like, more like milky than clear, right?
It'll transmit light, but it's not really clear.
Yeah, I would say give it a go. It was pretty neat.
Did you guys see the guy that printed transparent for aircraft on the ready room? Yeah, so one of the printers has done that, so that way he didn't paint the canopies, he painted the rest of the aircraft, masked off the canopies, and it left transparent canopies.
Dang.
I mean, obviously it gets a little weird because now you're seeing kind of through the model, but you're not looking at a 1/200 model up close. But he did do transparent canopy, so it looks pretty cool.
That's a technique.
Yeah,
that's kind of cool.
Yeah. That's one that I'm like, that's way too much detail. I'll just paint my canopies silver and put a blue wash over them. And
I don't know we're done. Did you hear that? Did you guys used to say that when you were? I know you did. Yeah, we were in the same Marine Corps, man.
Yeah, exactly. That's
you would overcomplicate it. That's a
way. That's a way to do it. As I've often said, that is not one of the 10,000 wrong ways to do it. It is one of the probably 1,000 right ways. Not a wrong way, but yeah, that's a way to do it. Yeah, no, it actually looked cool, but that's way more pain than I want to go through. So whatever. Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, then we're going to make it a quick episode and let everyone get back to the rest of their evenings and things. Thanks for joining us. And please like and subscribe to the podcast. If you are listening to this on our usual podcatchers, if you're out there, also go check out our YouTube channel. We've thrown up a bunch of videos. We do have some slightly humorous shorts. And there are some other videos covering topics that we don't cover on the podcast directly. So remember, if you're not flying hard, you're hardly flying.
Crazy that you can go to a whole weekend called World War II weekend and you'll find less people dressed like Nazis than at Historicon. It's like, actually, it's like a miracle. I'm like, what the fuck? This is your time to shine.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, this is your time to do this. This is your place. These are your people. Why aren't you here?
I guess aren't Totenkopf tattoos in vogue now? I think it's a thing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. You'd go right to the front of the list to run for the freaking party.